So my name is Chuck Worcester. I'm the owner of Sunrise Farm in White River Junction, Vermont. This is our 20th year of operation. We are a farm that mostly produces certified organic vegetables, about 3/4 of our business. And then we also raise sheep and chickens for meat, wool, eggs. And then even smaller side projects, we tap about 600 maple trees for maple sugar, maple syrup, and we also can up a couple hundred pounds of honey every year from our beehives. For me as an organic farmer, the definition of organic is that we are taking care of our soil and increasing the organic matter in our soil. And I use that almost as kind of a shorthand for sort of the ecological health of the whole farm and the farm community. Our practices are all about trying to do that, and we test our soil every year to see how we're doing, if we're increasing organic matter in the soil, and if we're not, what can we be doing to do that. Our particular farm is what's called a CSA, Community Supported Agriculture. And it's almost like a co-op, knowing who we're growing the food for. It adds a wonderful sort of community and people aspect to farming. In terms of the crops we grow, we're sort of continually tinkering with what we grow based on a couple of things. One is what people ask us to grow, and that's sort of part of the nice thing about being in this co-op is, we ask people and people volunteer and say, hey, have you considered growing something else? Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. It just depends on what the crop is. For example, like we would love to grow avocados. We have to grow them inside a heated greenhouse, and they probably still wouldn't be happy because there's so little daylight. We certainly grow more of warm season crops with more ease, things like peppers and eggplants and tomatoes, and partly we have a longer growing season, even in the 20 years that I've been at it, seen that shift. We also have built 8 different greenhouses, which is an effort to both expand what we're able to grow for people and also to protect some of what we're growing from some of the impacts of changing climate. Probably the most profound effect of climate change we've felt so far is that the frequency of extreme rain events has gone up by about 30%. And so that's measured by storms that bring more than 2 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. And so, of course, when you have more rain coming faster, it tends to erode the land. Erosion does 2 things. One is it washes away the soil, which is a little bit of a longer-term problem. The immediate problem is that it also washes away your fertility. So because of that, we have really sort of constrained some of the land that we're growing on. And then we also have to make sure that when it rains that hard, the water has some place to go, so it doesn't just stay on the field. So we've had to do a little bit of kind of changing of drainage, adding some ditches, putting in some culverts, so that when we get heavy rain events, the water is able to move on. There's been a temperature effect too, and this one's been a little bit harder to notice for us. You would routinely go below 20 below in the winter. Now I think we've gone below 20 below maybe once or twice in the last decade, and maybe only 5 times in the last 2 decades. So winter minimum, if you look at your map of like, oh, what zone am I for gardening? It's all determined by those extreme cold temperatures. So as that has come up, our zone has moved. Those zones tend to determine what bugs and pests and blights can overwinter where. The flip side of that is we can grow more stuff. Like, that's moving the climate more favorable in terms of what we can grow here. Sort of the old general rule around here was, you're good from Memorial Day to Labor Day. That's like your frost-free window. But really, in the spring, that's moved forward a couple weeks, and in the fall, it's moved back maybe 3 or 4. So particularly in the spring, we try to take advantage of that we just start planting things earlier. And then in the fall, actually, has been even more pronounced. We can grow lettuce and green stuff outside later with less concern than we used to. One of the issues that isn't talked about much, I think, is growing vegetables requires a fair bit of fossil fuel, and plastic is commonly used, especially in organic agriculture. It's a bit of a trade-off. On a more of a conventional farm, you might drive a tractor down a field only a few times, you might spray something, or maybe you drive a few times and you mechanically control the weeds. In the case of organic farming, we might be put down a plastic mulch to control the weeds because there aren't sprays that we can use, or we end up driving over the field much more often to bring tools over that can help us to weeds. So there's that endless kind of pressure moving you into that direction, which gets to that larger problem of fossil fuel is so cheap that it's this, depending on your point of view, it's like a subsidy or it's a corrosion that's destroying our ability to grow food. Still, in the grand scheme, for someone in our town to buy their vegetables from us, the carbon footprint is so much smaller than it is from food that's been transported 3,000, 5,000 miles. So for sequestering carbon, on the vegetable side, our goal is to increase organic matter always. Some of our soils, especially in our greenhouses, the organic matter is up around 8%, 10%. In a conventional vegetable field, it can be down around 1 or 2%. Out in the field, when you have a multi-species rotation that we have of lambs, sheep, chickens, all out there together, we are increasing the organic matter in the soil, we're increasing the diversity of the plants in the soil, we're sequestering carbon in the roots. So it's all moving in the right direction. And so what happens is the plant grows, the animals come and they eat it right down to the roots, they fertilize it, and then they move on. And so then the plant comes back even more vigorous than it was before. So you're getting the benefit of the animal is obviously eating what it needs, so the animal's growing, but the plant, the amount of biomass is also increased, especially the below ground root structure and the carbon that's stored down there. In any event, that type of animal agriculture has tremendous potential for sequestering carbon. The problem is it's expensive to do it that way. So we're out there moving animals all the time. We're bringing water to them. We're bringing ourselves to them. In conventional ag, the animals are locked up in a building and they don't go anywhere. You know where they are. So it's much cheaper. So the cost of meat is so much lower than it is to raise it on the pasture. Ironically, I think where we are and the technology that we have, we are pretty well positioned to respond to the mechanics of climate change. But unfortunately, we are not in a position to respond to the economics of it, which is to say, as long as we allow carbon to be, subsidized essentially by climate change, it really limits what farms like us are going to be able to accomplish. One of the things that we're hoping to do as part of our stewardship of this land is to have it in long-term conservation through a conservation easement. And we've done that on some of our land already, and ideally we will continue to do that on the rest of the land. And part of that is because the population has been pretty steady in northern New England. And if you ask people why don't you live in northern New England? People pretty much say because the winters are rough. So as the winters get less and less ferocious and less intense, that obstacle is going to be lowered. Meanwhile, places that people have moved to are facing increasing stress from water and drought and wildfire, and it isn't hard for me to feel like this part of the world is going to become ever more attractive to people. If we can sort of have this land available and protected, then that can be available to feed the new people who come. Farming, just like everything else, it's a business that also needs to exist in the economy. And if it doesn't exist in the economy, it's not going to exist in the environment either. Buy local food, both because it's tastier and has better vitamin and nutritional profile, but you're also accomplishing a lot of these societal goods that you're hoping for in terms of climate change mitigation and resiliency.